During the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. And so Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylon and placed them in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. He told him, "Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men. Make sure they're well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, are suited to serve in the royal palace. Then train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon." The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. But he responded, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded." Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after them. "Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water," Daniel said, "and at the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see." The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so they entered the royal service. And whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. Shouldn't be hard for you to know where that comes from, but does everybody know where that comes from? Book of Daniel. Book of David, what? The book of Daniel, chapter 1, starting at verse 1. Here we have a story of a bunch of kids. They are young men who are of noble descent, and Judah, specifically in this case, was besieged by the Babylonian Empire. To give you a concept of the Babylonian Empire that you probably will understand from pop culture, the Babylonian Empire was, it's a one-off example, but was taken over by the big guy that looked like Yul Brenner in 300. Xerxes. Remember him? The guy that thought he was a god? Okay. Everybody know who Yul Brenner is? Yes, I know you know who Yul Brenner is, James. Are we on? Good to go? Okay. Xerxes in 300, the guy that was bald and had all the chains and everything. Okay. This is a real person in history. Daniel is a real event in history. The book of Daniel is a real event in history with real people. Daniel is a very specific book. It's important. We're not going to go too much into it today because it's going to be talked about over the course of the year. But the long and short of it is that Daniel was a member of 4 guys who were part of the nobility of Israel, specifically the tribe of Judah, and they were taken captive by the Babylonian Empire. right now, the Babylonian Empire is around what area? Yeah. In fact, Babylon is also known to hold, at the behest of Nebuchadnezzar, one of the original 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Babylon was a big deal. Nebuchadnezzar was a big deal. This is a real person in real time and real space. So what you need to know here is that he took captive Judah. And he took captive Israel as we understand it. And during this time that he took them captive, he was, that's part of like what we do in terms of war. But he was kind of a good guy. Like in terms of war, he was, he knew, he was smart. He took them captive, but he made sure to take nobility and raise them up, give them the language, give them responsibility in his kingdom. He sort of assimilated them. This tactic would be taken 4 kingdoms later by Rome, who would do the same thing with its people. So, in any case, Daniel, he was brought into slavery, just like who? Joseph. And just like Joseph, Daniel would do what? He would rise up through the ranks to become one of the most powerful people in all of Babylon. Now, was slavery a good situation for Daniel? No. James chapter 1, verse 19 and on. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Human nature does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So get rid of all of the filth and evil in your lives and humbly accept the word God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls. But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey it, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and then forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you for doing it. If you claim to be religious, but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress, and refusing to let the world corrupt you. How do those two things connect to each other? We are going to be discussing that very topic today. The question here is, what type of person are you? What type of person are you? Are you righteous or are you right? I suppose you could just be wrong on top of it. But let's assume that we all think that we're good. What type of person are you? Are you righteous or are you right? We've been told in the past that we're supposed to remove the things that stand in our way from being righteous. Correct? We're supposed to get rid of those things and shed those things. James takes that a step further. He asks us to not only get rid of what's there, but to do something that is very, very hard to do for people that have a hard time getting rid of what's there. And that is to think ahead. What do I mean by that? He asks us to think not about the person that we are, but about the person that we're becoming. Right? Right? This passage, he says, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Think about that. When you're getting angry, remember that statement. Inscribe that statement into your heart. human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. There's a clear intent here. Production, right? There's a clear intent here to produce the righteousness which God desires. What type of person are we? Do we think ahead about what it is that we're producing with our actions? We're not supposed to be mindless. You've heard that. We're supposed to be intentful. James talks about muscle memory, but James is not saying that in your muscle memory you forget and lose your thought process. What he's talking about is that your body gets used to submitting to the thought process that you keep. Does that make sense? Everybody understand that? So you have to have a concept, a clear idea that you are trying to produce something. We're not supposed to be creatures of regiment. What does that mean? But aren't we supposed to be creatures of regiment? That's the hard one, right? We're not supposed to be creatures of regiment. We're not supposed to be doing the same thing over and over. But we are supposed to be reliable. So how is it that we bridge the gap between regiment and reliability? Yes, it is. It is predictable versus reliable. In fact, I have in my notes literally reliable but not predictable. What is the wording that this church uses all the time when we refer to that tension? Mechanism. Mechanism versus organicness. We are not supposed to be mechanical in our thought process, but we are supposed to be reliable. So we are supposed to, for instance, we are supposed to always speak in a way that makes the other person feel that we want them there. Okay? So one could say that we're being mechanistic, but at the point that we're being mechanistic, I said I love you. That doesn't mean that you actually love that person. So that's where that begins to fail. And here we go again into the concept of right versus righteous. But now we're taking it a step further, and we're talking about actions that lack intent. In order for our actions to be something, they have to have intent. But intent only comes with obedience. And obedience shows itself out in places where it's not comfortable to be obedient. Because it's easy for you to be obedient when everything's good, right? It's easy for you to show up to church when you've gotten a full night's rest, right? And you don't have anything going on, like Super Bowl Sunday. It's easy for you to pay your tithe when you have a surplus of money, right? Because, hey, it's not really going to affect you to take 10% off the top. It's easy for you to speak gently and kindly to the other person when you are infatuated with them. When everything has set you up. When what is happening is you are sitting on a beach and there's a sunset and you know, music is playing in the background and you've taken a couple shots of something and now it's like, hey man, I love you. That's easy for you. But that doesn't show that you have the right mindset. That shows that everything's convenient. You can just sort of fall into acting that way. What we're talking about here is obedience, a structured, reliable concept that you don't just fall into, but you intend to happen. And the only way that we are going to be able to prove obedience is when the going gets tough. Makes sense, right? So James makes a comment that you should inscribe into your heart. Again, be slow to anger. Be slow to speak. Be quick to listen. Directly after that comment, he says, "For the anger of men does not produce the righteousness which God desires." Why are those things connected to each other? Why is that the direct thought process afterwards? Because it's connected to righteousness. How we listen to each other, how we talk to each other, how we move in the space between each other is connected to righteousness. And I don't care whether you dot your I's or cross your T's, if you are not being slow to do these things, you're not being obedient to God. Now, I will go further into that a little bit later, but I want you to hang on that thought process. Actually, I'll go. My notes say I should go into it now, so I'll go into it now. Most of you have been around me for a long period of time. Some of you haven't been around me for a long period of time. But all of you know that I am a very fast thinker. Now, you can tell, well, let me add to that. Not only am I a fast thinker, but I'm also super fast at regurgitating. Like processing, spitting back out, okay? Beth says something about me. She says that when I am stressed out, I'm not fun. And what she's referring to is that I don't joke around. Where's Beth? Is she in sanctuary? No, she's not. But Beth says something about that about me. Oh, there she is. That when I'm stressed out, I don't joke around. So, and it's different because I'm not laid back like I normally appear to be, okay? But do I still interact with people? Yes. Do I still process what they're saying and respond to them? Yes. But do I do it correctly? It's very hard. It's very hard. And you know that I'm getting stressed out because what happens in my interaction? It becomes rapid fire. It becomes, you start to say something to me and it's like, boom. All of a sudden, Heidi's nodding her head. We spent a lot of time working with each other, and I'm getting stressed out, and before she can finish saying something, I have already responded to her. Because my brain works very fast, faster than most people's. And I have already devised 10 steps ahead of what the person is going to say to me. And so I'm going to cut them off because I'm not interested in having that relationship. I'm interested in dotting my I's and crossing my T's. Everybody knows that about themselves, right? Everybody knows that when you're getting stressed out, when everything is chaotic around you, that you become, what's the term? Short, right? Why can we say that? Because it's true. It's just a universal truth that human beings, when they are stressed out and they are not focused correctly, become short. And let me add to it another term, sighted, short-sighted. That they become short-sighted, that they don't see what is there. Now, why is it that we do that? According to James, he calls that human anger. Anger is such a loaded term, so let's define it. What does it look like when we're angry? I said for me, it looks like I start to get short. I have spent a long time in my life, because everybody knows that my words go way longer than I feel they should, and that 2 words for me is like a page for everybody else. So I spent a long time in my life dealing with the consequences of anger, so I have a little bit of experience here, and I try to relegate that aspect of who I am, but, you know, at the end of hours and hours and hours of being on call and so on and so forth, sometimes it gets to you. And what happens? You're walking on water, doing the impossible. What happens? Start beginning to sink, right? You start beginning to sink. And so you lash out. And that is anger. Let's define anger. Anger is, you ready for this? Pleasure-based. What does that mean? Anger is pleasure-based. And what's that as opposed to? Well, anger is pleasure-based. It is the downside of infatuation. It's immature. It leads to fickleness. It leads to people being tossed to and fro. It arises when one's focus is misplaced, and they are suddenly caught off guard with the disparity of where they are versus where they want to be. Think about your life and ask yourself, in those moments when you've been angry, is that true? When you've been angry, is it because all of a sudden you found out that you weren't where you thought you were supposed to be, that the situation is out of control, and that you sort of like drifted a little bit, like in your mind? And now all of a sudden you realize the fullness of the situation, and you're like, So because of that, because you realize that you aren't where you're supposed to be, that means we can connect it to what? Go the other direction, guys. There's a what? Anger. It's not where you want to be. It's you reacting to the state that you're now in, but you've sort of, I'm giving you a hint, lost something. And so now you're reacting to it. What then can we connect anger to? Loss. And we know that anger is, in fact, a stage of loss. Right? People tend to get angry after they lose something, either in their life, with a traumatic event, or even a physical object. It's like, no, my keys can't be gone. And then you're like, my keys are gone. And then you're like, after that, what are you like? You're like, well, maybe I can borrow someone else's keys. And then after that, you're like, man, I just lose everything. And then finally you're like, I should just get some new keys. I've just described the stages of loss. Anger is one of those stages. It's connected to loss. There's a feeling that you've lost something. And when does it go away? It goes away the moment that feeling goes away. Why? Because it's connected to pleasure. How do you deal with loss? How do most people deal with loss? What do? They replace what they've lost, right? How do most people with bad coping mechanisms deal with loss? They supplant it with something else. So whether it be a chemical dependency or a relationship, I just broke up. What do? Hook up with someone else. I just lost this, expensive piece of equipment. What do I do to make myself feel happy again? I go buy something new. Well, it's okay because now this thing is newer. So then I can like it. Instead of asking questions like, maybe I shouldn't own that piece of equipment because I can't be responsible with it. It completely has to do with pleasure. And this is indifference to righteousness. Righteousness is intentful. It's a holy action. When I say it's a holy action, I mean that it is set apart. It's an action which is set apart. It's distinct. It's different. It is not based on infatuation, but in fact is based on what? If it's not based on infatuation, what's it based on? Love. Love. It's love-based. It's focused. It's able to see beyond miscommunication. It's able to look past what is happening in the now and what disparity looks to be present. And it says, I am a ship at sea and there's a storm coming. And you know what it says? It says, I just need to make it through that storm. Or I need to go to land because there's still land. Or it says, I just need to batten down the hatches and wait that storm out until calm comes again. Anger says, My situation sucks. I can't believe this is happening to me. This storm is approaching. My life is over. That's pretty dumb. It's not righteous. Righteousness does not assume loss, does it? Righteousness assumes hope. Does everybody understand that? It assumes that salvation is coming. It acts with urgency, but that urgency is calm, as opposed to paranoid. It's like, and yes, this is in my notes, it's like Liam Neeson in Taken, where now he has experienced a loss. But has he? Like the moment his daughter is taken from him, what's his response? It is a reality to him that his daughter is coming back. The only thing that is not a reality, the only thing that is up for grabs, is whether these criminals are going to be killed in the process. He has not experienced loss. He doesn't assume it, because he has certain things that he is prepared for. And like Liam Neeson, we as elders intend to prepare you with certain skills that will be useful in these times. You will have a particular set of skills that will keep you in control when everything is not in control. Righteousness is doing, it is not saying. It is a very interesting thing that this passage puts these things together. It starts off by talking about, about being slow to speak. And then it talks about doing God's word and not just understanding it or reading it. And then it says that if you don't get that, it's like you forget yourself. What did I say earlier about what? That's exactly the verse. What did I say earlier about what this sense of loss and human anger produces? It produces a fickleness, a sort of bipolar disorder, where literally you become one person during this time and another person this time, depending upon the situation that you're in. God's righteousness does not look like that. God's righteousness is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It is reliable, but interestingly enough, it is not predictable. Think about that. God is not predictable. That's why he is God. He cannot be put into a box. One minute he can create something, the next minute he can destroy it. He seems to be so big that he must be a machine, but we know that he's not because he says things like, I wish that I had never done that. Machines don't have feelings, despite what Philip K. Dick and Isaac Asimov might tell you. God is not a machine. He's organic. The moment that we start to look at ourselves as machines, as long as I dot my I's and cross my T's, it's good. No, it's not. You must obey, and obedience is not the same thing as doing. Do you understand that concept? Just because you fall in the grooves that are present does not mean that you're obeying, because obeying is a mindset. In other words, think of it this way. You tell your child to go get you a glass of water. Your child goes to get you a glass of water, and in that process, they fall and they scrape their knee and they break the glass of water that they got for you. Therefore, they did not get you a glass of water. Were they obedient? Yes. Because it does not require perfection to be obedient. It requires intent. You with me? Do as opposed to obey. We are supposed to follow God's word. We are supposed to obey it. And that looks a certain way. And you could say that doing is the same thing, but it's not. Doing is just falling into the grooves, as long as we keep a slow talking, as long as when everything is bothering us, we're calm, then we are being righteous. That's not true. That's not God's righteousness. God's righteousness is reliable, but it is not predictable. Sometimes Jesus sits on a mountain and tells people what's up and says, that the meek will inherit the earth. And then sometimes he builds a whip. If you knew God, you would know that he's capable of both actions. And you wouldn't see it as a contradiction. But if you think of God as a machine, that he's just following these steps, and this is what God must act like, then you don't know God. People who get angry about it, they're fad people. They're gossip people. Gossip mongers, I think is the term they use. So, it's not doing that makes people righteous before God. It is not wise to simply do. Do or do not, there is no try. No. As much as that statement works for a young child, it does not work for an old man. We need to be not merely talking about following through. There's a reason why James says that true religion is what? I just read it. It's like you looked in your Bible and walked away and couldn't remember it. Inscribe these words on your heart, people. True religion is helping orphans and widows and loving each other. Why is that the case? Why does he say that true religion is helping orphans and widows and loving each other? And how does that apply to doing God's word? It's very simple. Orphans and widows can't take care of themselves. Now, you're like, what? Of course widows can take care of themselves. Well, that's because you live in the now. But back then, if you had a husband and he died, you were essentially property. So if you didn't have him to take care of you, then you couldn't do normal things like buy things. You needed a man. I'm not saying this is how it should be. I'm saying this is how it was. You needed a man to help you with that. So the church was to come along and support these people who needed help. We are supposed to be that way. But what does that support look like when it is only a fad? I'll tell you what it looks like. Those riots. I'm angry. I'm so angry about these people who have been beaten or hurt, who've been wronged. So I'm going to hold my signs up and protest. And then 2 weeks later, man, that was such a powerful thing I did. What is that? If you're really angry, and what I mean by that is righteous indignation. If you were angered because things are not submitting to God's standard, then it wouldn't be that way. It would be the slow action that holds true through the test of time, through every storm, through every confrontation. And it wouldn't be quick to speak. And when somebody throws an insult your way, you wouldn't immediately throw it back at them. I remember Star Trek 4. Somebody says, "God damn you" to Kirk. And then Kirk says, "Well, God double damn you to you too." You're just like, seriously? Of course, he doesn't know, slang. But the point is, The point is, that was dumb. And that's how we react when we're in human anger, when we've suffered this sense of loss. It's all connected. If you're going to obey God, you must do it with intent. You can't just follow the grooves that people have set before you. It has to be an intentful thing. But in it being an intentful thing and not being mechanistic, it shows itself out in a way that the machine can't emulate. It can't articulate. Why do you think it is that we have computers that are faster than us and smarter than us? In other words, they can compute faster, okay? But they can't be human. Why? Because they're not made in the image of God. And as much as they can emulate, that's all that they will be doing, is emulating. Star Trek The Next Generation. Second Star Trek reference in this whole thing. Star Trek The Next Generation. Data talks about that a lot. About how he, as an android, is just trying to be human. He wasn't made to be that. He wasn't made in the image of his creator. He was made to look like his creator. If you want to be like God, guess what? You can be, because you are made in the image of God. You are supposed to be. But you can't do that when you look in the mirror and say, this is who I am. I am holy. I'm set apart. I am obedient to the structure which God presents, because I am a part of God's kingdom. I'm a representative. Then you turn away and you forget. You can't do that. For those of you who know, just want to throw out there that helping widows and orphans, it's not an event. Right? Because it takes a lot of work to take somebody on, right? And you can't get tickled over Christmas break and say to yourself, man, I really want to help those widows and orphans, and then, go visit an orphanage.